Monday on For the Record. It was a busy week at the state capitol for lawmakers, from data centers.
Our bill could actually be implemented. The Republican bill can't.
To no tax on tips.
This really gets into the government not reaching into the pockets of hardworking people.
We're breaking down the Assembly and Senate floor sessions. Plus, what officials in Rock County are doing to strengthen protections for survivors of domestic violence. And you've mentioned several times during our conversation that you believe there's a gap in the state law. What would you like to see from lawmakers in Madison?
I'm really hopeful that this being a conversation, that you having interviews like this, can help make it a priority.
And a year into Trump's second term, we're breaking down the impact on Wisconsin by the poll numbers. That's all coming up on For the Record.
Tough questions, real answers. Wisconsin's political conversations start here. This is For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Ellie LaLiberte. Well, the debate over artificial intelligence data centers continued at the state capitol this week. Republicans and Democrats agree data centers need to be regulated. They just disagree on how to do it.
At night when we look across that field right now, we hear frogs and there's no light.
Sean Haney has lived in his home in DeForest for 38 years. But soon, this could be the view out his front window.
It's going to change everything in that whole area.
Before an AI data center goes up across from his house, he'd like to see some regulation from the state.
Some clear guidelines on how much power can be used, where it's going to come from, how it's going to address water usage.
Both parties in the Assembly have introduced legislation this session. The Democrat bill would create labor, renewable energy, and rate requirements.
The number one goal of the bill is to protect the public.
But Tuesday, the Assembly passed the Republican-introduced bill.
My bill was deliberately simple. It was simple and focused on the core issues we hear everywhere.
It includes a requirement that water used by a data center for cooling must be a contained, closed-looped system to recycle it. The bill would also require the Public Service Commission to ensure other customers won't see the cost of the electric infrastructure to build or run data centers on their utility bills. However, during testimony last week, the PSC said parts of the Republican legislation would be, quote, challenging to implement.
Our bill could actually be implemented. The Republican bill can't. It's very strange if you're trying to pass legislation saying that it's to control rates, that you wouldn't listen to the people who understand the issue.
But the author of the bill says it's the PSC's job to figure out how this legislation could be implemented.
If the PSC is unable to actually measure power and consumption and sources, we got bigger concerns, I think, as we go forward. So it's certainly my belief. I'm not here to prescribe to the PSC how they would do this. It's more the fact that we need to make sure it's done so that Wisconsin ratepayers are absolutely protected.
But is it enough for Sean?
A couple of bills pending, but I don't think they have enough teeth in them yet.
Now, Democrats also criticized just how quickly this legislation moved through. When asked if his chamber would take up the bill, Senate Majority Leader Devin LeMahieu told reporters he likes the intent of the legislation, but said, quote, bills are often rushed through the Assembly. The bill will need to pass the Senate before it could head to the governor's desk. However, a spokesperson for Governor Evers tells me he's unlikely to support it. Wednesday, the state Senate held its first floor session of the year, voting to send several constitutional amendments to your ballot. One of those is an effort to limit DEI. This question on your ballot will ask voters if they want to prohibit governmental entities in the state from discriminating against or granting preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public employment, public education, public contracting, or public administration. Democrats say the amendment would take the state backwards, while Republicans call it long overdue. Also appearing on your ballot will be Assembly Joint Resolution 10. It will ask voters if they want to ban the state from restricting gatherings in places of worship in response to a state of emergency. That includes a health emergency. It's in direct response to the governor's Safer at Home order during the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced non-essential businesses to shut down and limit the sizes of indoor gatherings, including worship services. The Senate also passed an amendment to limit the governor's veto power, and if it passes the Assembly, it'll be on your ballot in November. This constitutional amendment looks to prohibit the governor from using his partial veto to create or increase any tax or fee. Right now, Wisconsin governors are just limited in that they cannot create a new word or sentence using the veto. The amendment comes after a move Governor Evers made in 2023 when he crossed out numbers and dashes to cement school funding increases for 400 years. Wednesday, the amendment passed along party lines, Democrats opposing the move on the floor.
This constitutional amendment is not about good government. It's about shifting power and locking in a political advantage.
Now, to place a constitutional amendment on the ballot, it needs to pass the legislature in 2 consecutive sessions. A bill to cut taxes on tips is heading to the governor's desk. Roughly 90,000 Wisconsinites rely on tips as part of their pay. The bill passed the Senate this week and the Assembly last Thursday. It would mirror the federal bill that allows you to deduct up to $25,000 on reported tips. But Democrats argue that the real solution would be to raise Wisconsin's minimum wage, which is at the federal minimum.
Minimum wage should be higher, Madam President. It should be much higher than $7.25. But alas, that's where we're stuck at federally, among the lowest in the country. So if we decided to move it up, we have a slate of different options.
We were one step closer to eliminating taxes on tipped wages for hardworking Americans with this language before us today. So I just want to say, obviously you can talk to those in the service industry out in your own communities, but this is clearly about affordability.
The bill would remain in effect through 2028. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, press conferences, committee hearings, and floor sessions have not been covered on Wisconsin Eye, our state's version of C-SPAN. Wisconsin Eye went dark in December due to fundraising challenges, but this week, lawmakers announced a bipartisan deal.
Something kind of different today. We don't usually do joint media availability, but
if there's one thing Assembly Republicans and Democrats agree on, it's transparency.
It's very important for the public to have access.
The Speaker and Minority Leader announcing a bipartisan bill to help bring the coverage of Wisconsin Eye, a public affairs network, back to the Capitol.
I think it's a win-win for all involved.
In the recent state budget, $10 million was put aside for Wisconsin Eye in a matching fund. But the new proposal would put that $10 million into a trust fund, with the interest accrued off of it going to the network.
But the interest from the trust fund is not expected to cover their total budget, which is a little over $900,000 annually. So there's an expectation that they would need to raise a few $100,000 a year.
But does the bill have the support of the state Senate?
I think they're still working through some of the details of how they'd like to work it, and that's why we don't have a finalized agreement. We wanted to get the bill out there, start the idea.
Other provisions of the bill would require Wisconsin Eye to increase operational transparency and reports to the state legislature.
At a time when we don't always find consensus, it is nice that on something like transparency and open government, I think we're in sync, so thank you for that.
Voss also said that Assembly leadership intends to sign a short-term contract with Wisconsin Eye to broadcast the February floor period. Governor Evers is optimistic about reaching a deal with Republican lawmakers to release $125 million to combat PFAS contamination. PFAS are often referred to as forever chemicals because they don't degrade easily. Wednesday, the Assembly Committee on Environment held a public hearing on 2 bills that aim to clean up PFAS. In a statement, Evers wrote, "I'm as optimistic as ever that PFAS can be a bipartisan success story for us in 2026 and that we can work together to make it happen. I remain hopeful that Republican lawmakers will continue working with me and my administration to get this done and get it done right." And next on For the Record, Rock County officials say there's a loophole in state law that can hurt domestic violence victims. We're talking with the district attorney about a new rule when we come back. Officials in Rock County are extending temporary restraining orders for survivors of domestic violence. Currently, under Wisconsin law, when a person is arrested for domestic violence, the victim can enforce a 72-hour no contact to protect themselves. If the arrested person is charged criminally, judges can make no contact with the victim a bond condition. However, according to the Rock County District Attorney, if an offender's first court date isn't until 6 to 8 weeks later, then there's nothing protecting the victim after the first 72 hours. I spoke with the District Attorney, Jason Sanders, about the area's rule change. Jason, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get started by breaking down these new rules. If you can quickly just kind of explain what they'll do.
So there are two different ones that are instituted right away, new rules for Rock County. The first is that we are extending a no contact until the first court date for a larger number of domestic violence cases to protect victims. And the second is that we are asking for more victim input on what a safe and sustainable limited contact might look like. After those 72 hours, there's nothing protecting that victim at all. And that's just kind of, it's a hole that doesn't need to be there, but it is, frankly, it's not a thing we've addressed at a legislative level yet. But we had a bunch of law enforcement, bringing that to our attention as what can we do about it?
Now, you mentioned law enforcement bringing these concerns up. What exactly did you hear from them?
We have a couple of agencies here, Rock County Sheriff's Office and Janesville Police Department especially, who have domestic violence units. There's officers who they get extra training in that. They try to be very hands-on in collaborating with victims. And I mean, there are a number of things that they're frustrated by. But one thing that kept kind of popping up was, I arrest an abuser, there's a 72-hour no contact, I give him a court date. And then before that first court date even happens, we're getting called back there because he just showed up and he's been drinking again, and now what? And as I looked at that to try to think of any sort of solution to it, we brainstormed, and then I wrote it all up in about 5 pages and sent it to what's called our Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. We ended up creating this as a solution to try to locally protect victims in a way that I hope eventually maybe the state law might, but it's not exactly a thing that's got a lot of headlines, and therefore there's not a lot of call for somebody to even look at that law, let alone change it.
I also read that part of this would be speeding up the court process. Why is that important?
When somebody gets a future court date, it is often 4 to 6 weeks ahead. What we're trying to do is to get the domestic violence court dates to be like 2 or 3 weeks. Bring it in there more quickly. Because by extending this no contact, we are protecting victims, but we're also, depending on the situation, sometimes we're throwing a giant monkey wrench into a family. What if they work different shifts and one of them is parenting while the other one's working, right? Not having any contact can sometimes become its own problem. So first of all, we want to shorten that time frame because we want to avoid that cost to victims. But then secondly, that's why we're asking them with this new limited contact form.
And you've mentioned several times during our conversation that you believe there's a gap in the state law. What would you like to see from lawmakers in Madison?
And I'm really hopeful that this being a conversation, that you having interviews like this, can help make it a priority. Once it's on the table and it's a thing that people are talking about, I would really like our legislators to talk about some variation of this program. If they come up with something better, great, God bless them. This is us making the best tool we can. But there's clearly a gap if somebody doesn't go to jail after the 72 hours. Sometimes that gap is weeks. Sometimes it's a month. Nothing is protecting a victim. Let's do something. But then secondly, I would like this spotlight to also be a spark in conversation about what we can do for domestic violence, because it is an ongoing concern. It is never going to go all the way away, but I think we could do more to protect victims.
And I know that this rule really just took effect, but in the future, how do you see this helping victims?
It will, provide more empowerment in general. That's not quite the same thing as protection, but it's really important. A lot of people feel good or bad about the court system based on how heard they feel. Now, if the 72-hour is extended, that is a matter of weeks where somebody has breathing room. And maybe that breathing room is, I want to file for a restraining order, or I want to terminate this relationship. Or maybe that breathing room is, okay, you need to get sober and we're going to go to couples counseling or whatever. But that space to make a decision is now so much greater than the hour that the police were there, and then I'll see you in 73 hours, which is what happens, unfortunately, any place there's not a rule like this. And lastly, by allowing for a recourse, right? If I've got a no contact and my abuser shows up and I call police, that person goes to jail and is arrested, right? Like now there is just an improved feeling of safety.
Jason Sanders, the Rock County District Attorney, with us this morning. Thank you for your time. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, this is the helpline for the Domestic Abuse Intervention Services. You can call YWCA Rock County at any time or message the text line at the bottom of your screen. And next on For the Record, a year back in office for President Donald Trump. We're looking at poll numbers to see how that year has gone.
You're watching For the Record with host Ellie LaLiberte.
Tuesday marked 1 year since Donald Trump began his second term as president. His second term in office came off of promises of lowering prices for working families, cutting taxes, and increasing deportations. But in the 365 days since moving back into the White House, Democrats say Trump has yet to significantly curb the prices of everyday products.
In his second term, in his first year, we're seeing a lot of damage done to working families. You go to the grocery store and costs are going up. We're seeing coffee prices increase. We're seeing in particular the cost of beef, ground beef, steaks, staples that you need to be able to feed your family.
But that sentiment is not shared by the Republican National Convention. In a statement to us, a spokesperson for the RNC said, quote, in his first year back in office, President Trump has helped deliver safer streets and lower costs for Wisconsin families. 1 year with Trump has proven that after 4 failing years under Biden, America just needed a new president. And to break down Trump's first year back in office by the numbers, I sat down with Marquette Law School poll director Charles Franklin. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So 1 year into Trump's second term, what do the numbers show us about how that year has gone?
Yeah, I think the main picture is overall job approval for the president has come down over the course of the year. But I think some commentators exaggerate how much it's come down. He started the year at about 48, maybe 49% job approval. He's ending the year with something between 40 and 42% approval. So that's been a steady downturn throughout the year. But you see some headlines that say his approval has cratered or collapsed, and that's just not true. This puts him a shade better than where he was at the end of his first year in the first term, neither significantly above nor significantly below. And then there's some individual issues, some of which he gets high marks on. Dealing with the southern border is a 55% approval, when has been for a while. Negotiating or helping negotiate the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, that got him over a 60% approval rating in November when he did that. But everything else is below 50%, with immigration generally at about 45%. His overall approval rating, as I said, is averaging between 40 and 42. But then at the low end, the economy is a little bit below that, and especially handling inflation is down to just 28% approval in our last poll. So it's a wide range of approvals. Most of them have edged down over the course of the year.
And I want to talk about the economy and inflation here in just a second, but I want to zoom in really quickly on Wisconsin and see how folks here are feeling about the president into his first year.
His job approval in our Wisconsin polling is running a couple of points above his national average. So he's in the 44, 45% approval rating in Wisconsin versus that 40 to 42 nationally. So a little bit better. Of course, we are a state that he won a little over a year ago. And so, but the concerns that we see in Wisconsin mirror those of the country. The most important problem here is inflation and cost of living, though healthcare costs is number 2 in our last Wisconsin poll. The other thing that we see is Wisconsin, like the country, is concerned about tariffs and really think tariffs have hurt Wisconsin farmers. And on that issue, even among Republicans, only a third think that tariffs have helped farmers. A third of Republicans think they've hurt farmers, and a third of Republicans think they haven't had any effect on farmers. Everybody else, independents and Democrats, are very negative on the impact that's having on our farming community.
And I want to talk now, kind of going back to this affordability topic, because it seems like it's going to be the topic going into the midterms, which are often when you have a president in power and one party kind of a referendum on him during the midterms. So how are people satisfied with the economy right now? You pointed to some numbers earlier, but broadly, what do the numbers show us?
There's still real negativity about the economy. And again, there's a bit of an argument about whether we're too gloomy compared to what the objective economic data is showing. But here in Wisconsin, we ask a question about how are you getting along, how are you and your family getting along financially? Are you living comfortably, just getting by, or struggling? And during the first Trump administration, that was running a little over 60% saying we're living comfortably. Under Biden, that fell into the low 40s. It's now up into the mid 50s, well, low 50s. So it's below where it was in the first Trump administration. It's about where it was towards the end of the Obama administration, and it's up just a little bit from the Biden administration. So we're still pretty gloomy on that.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Now, that was a condensed version of our interview. To hear what the polls tell us about the upcoming midterm elections, you can find our full conversation up right now on channel3000.com. For the record, we'll be right back.
We live in a nation where they are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
That was 10-year-old Aria Terry reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech at this year's celebration of the civil rights leader at the state capitol. She spoke to a crowd of hundreds as part of the 46th annual ceremony.
I feel like I'm honoring him by saying this, and I'm so happy to have had this opportunity.
And that'll do it for us this week. A reminder, you can watch full episodes of the show as well as expanded interviews on our website, channel3000.com. Have a great rest of your weekend. For the record, I'm Ellie LaLiberte.
This has been For the Record.